Daniel adjusted the creaky old chair on his porch, staring at the stars above his quiet countryside home. It had been years since he left behind the chaos of the wider galaxy, choosing instead the solitude of Earth. Though he tried to forget, a memory always lingered in his mind, a pair of glowing violet eyes, and a voice that once whispered his name with a mix of curiosity and warmth. He sighed, sipping from his mug of tea, when a strange glow lit up the horizon. At first, Daniel thought it was a trick of the moon, but the light flickered and danced, moving unnaturally. His heart raced as he set down his mug and stepped onto the dew-soaked grass, narrowing his eyes at the source. The light grew brighter, casting long shadows around him. Then, with a sudden gust of wind, the glow dimmed and a figure appeared in its place. Daniel froze, his breath caught in his throat. It was her. "Tayani," he whispered, unable to believe his eyes. The alien woman stepped forward, her once majestic armor now battered and dull. Her violet eyes glimmered with exhaustion and relief as she looked at him. Her long silver hair, once meticulously tied, was tangled, and her movements were slow, as if every step was a struggle. "You remember me," she said softly, her voice carrying that same melodic tone he'd never forgotten. "How could I not?" Daniel replied, his voice barely audible. He wanted to say more, but his mind struggled to process the situation. Tayani was supposed to be light years away, a memory he thought would remain buried in the past. Tayani stumbled, and Daniel instinctively reached out, catching her before she fell. Her skin was cool to the touch, but there was an undeniable vitality in her presence. "I had no choice," Tayani said, her voice trembling. "I had to come back. You're the only one who can help me." Daniel blinked, confused. "Help you? What are you talking about?" She looked over her shoulder, her sharp senses picking up something Daniel couldn't hear or see. "They're after me, Daniel. And now, they'll come for you too." His pulse quickened. "Who's after you? What did you do?" Tayani straightened, her gaze locking with his. "It's not what I did. It's who I am. And because of that, you're in danger just by being near me." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know what she'd brought to his doorstep, but he could see the fear in her eyes. This was no ordinary visit. "Come inside," he said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his chest. "You look like you're about to collapse." Tayani hesitated but nodded, allowing him to guide her into his small home. As he shut the door, he couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet life was about to change forever. Outside, the faint glow on the horizon flickered ominously, as if warning that the peace of Earth would soon be shattered. The warmth of Daniel's small home was a sharp contrast to the cool night outside. Tayani sat on the worn couch, her posture tense, as though she expected danger to burst through the walls at any moment. Her violet eyes darted around the room, scanning every corner for threats. Daniel brought her a glass of water, which she accepted with a trembling hand. "You look worse than the last time I saw you," Daniel said, attempting a lighthearted tone, though his chest felt heavy with concern. Tayani managed a faint smile. "Years haven't been kind to me, but I had no other choice. I had to come back." Daniel sat across from her, his elbows resting on his knees. "You keep saying that, but you haven't told me why. What's going on, Tayani? Why are you here?" She hesitated, gripping the glass tightly as if drawing strength from its cool surface. "Do you remember when we first met, when your people and mine joined forces to stop the Starfire crisis?" He nodded. How could he forget? It had been the most chaotic and dangerous time of his life, but also the most meaningful. Working alongside Tayani, he'd witnessed both the brilliance of her alien kind and the unique resourcefulness of humanity. Together, they'd survived against impossible odds. "I never forgot what you did," Tayani continued, her voice soft but firm. "You saved not just me but countless others. I learned something that day, something your people taught me. Humans see solutions where others see despair. You find a way when no one else can. Daniel frowned, unsure where she was going with this. That was a long time ago. I'm not the same person now. You are, Tayani insisted, her eyes locking with his. That's why I came back. My people are in danger, Daniel. An enemy has risen. A faction so ruthless, so relentless, that they've brought entire civilizations to their knees. The Ilverans. Where next? Daniel leaned back, rubbing his temples. And you think I can stop them? Tayani, I'm just one man. I don't have an army or advanced technology. What do you expect me to do? Tayani set the glass down, leaning forward urgently. You don't need an army. You have something they don't. Your mind, your creativity, your determination. When the Starfire crisis ended, I tried to forget Earth, to forget you. But I couldn't. And now, when my people face extinction, I know there's only one place to turn. Daniel stared at her, his thoughts racing. He could see the desperation in her eyes, the weight of the responsibility she carried. Part of him wanted to turn her away, to say her problems weren't his. But a stronger part, the part that remembered their bond, couldn't ignore her plea. Before he could respond, a low hum echoed through the air. Tayani's head snapped toward the window. They've found me, she whispered. Daniel's blood ran cold as he reached for the rifle he kept by the door. Then we'd better be ready. The hum outside grew louder, resonating through the walls of Daniel's small home. It wasn't the sound of wind or machinery. It was something unnatural, something alien. Tayani's hands tightened on the edge of the couch, her violet eyes flicking to the window with an intensity that made Daniel's stomach knot. Stay here, he said, his voice low but firm as he grabbed his rifle and moved toward the window. No, Tayani hissed, rising to her feet despite her exhaustion. You don't understand what you're dealing with. These aren't ordinary soldiers. They're hunters, relentless and precise. They won't stop until they've taken me, or destroyed everything in their path. Daniel peeked through the curtains. The dark woods surrounding his home were eerily still, but the faint glow of the horizon was now closer, pulsing with an otherworldly rhythm. His instincts screamed danger, but he pushed the fear aside. Then you need to tell me what we're up against, Daniel said, keeping his voice steady. What kind of hunters are we talking about? Tayani stepped closer, her expression grim. They're called Vardek, mercenaries bred for one purpose, capture or kill. They're enhanced with cybernetic implants, faster and stronger than anything you've faced. And they won't care that you're human. If you're protecting me, you're a target. Daniel's grip tightened on the rifle. He wasn't a stranger to danger. He'd faced his share of chaos during the Starfire crisis. But this felt different. Personal. Real. And it wasn't just his life on the line. Can they track us here? He asked. Tayani hesitated, then nodded. They likely followed my ship's energy signature. It was shielded, but not perfectly. I didn't have the resources to make it completely undetectable. Great, Daniel muttered, his mind racing. Then we need to move. Staying here is suicide. Before Tayani could respond, a sudden burst of light illuminated the forest. A loud mechanical screech followed, piercing the night air. Daniel's heart pounded as he saw dark shapes moving between the trees, their forms sleek and unnatural. They're here, Tayani whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel turned to her. Is there another way out of here? A safe spot nearby? Tayani shook her head. Nowhere they can't follow. But if we can reach my ship, we might stand a chance. Your ship? Daniel asked, confused. Where is it? About a mile from here, she said. I hid it in a cave near the river. Daniel exhaled sharply. A mile through those woods with them chasing us. Fantastic. Tayani's eyes softened, despite the fear in her expression. I wouldn't have come to you if I didn't believe we could survive this. Daniel nodded, determination hardening his features. Then let's survive. Stay close, and don't stop running unless I tell you. Grabbing a flashlight and a small pack of essentials, Daniel motioned for Tayani to follow. Together, they slipped into the dark forest, the hum of their pursuers growing louder with each step. The chase had begun, and failure wasn't an option. The forest was alive with sound. The crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant rustle of branches, and the low, menacing hum of the Vardic hunters. Daniel led the way, his flashlight cutting through the thick darkness, while Tayani followed closely, her breaths uneven but determined. Every muscle in his body was tense, every sense alert to the danger stalking them. "How far now?" Daniel whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "Half a mile," Tayani replied, her voice strained. "We're close, but they're getting closer." Daniel gritted his teeth, his mind racing for a plan. The hunters wouldn't just be fast. They'd be equipped with advanced tracking technology. Staying ahead of them wouldn't be enough. They needed a way to slow them down. "Over here," Daniel whispered, veering off the main path toward a thick patch of undergrowth. He knelt and rummaged through his pack, pulling out a small flare gun and a handful of tools. "What are you doing?" Tayani asked, her eyes darting nervously toward the glowing lights in the distance. "Buying us time," he said, quickly rigging a makeshift trap. Using a thin wire and a small explosive he'd kept for emergencies, he set up a tripwire across the narrow trail. "This won't stop them, but it might slow them down." Tayani nodded, though her expression betrayed her doubt. "Let's hope it works." They continued through the forest, the terrain becoming steeper as they neared the river. The sound of rushing water grew louder, mixing with the ever-present hum of the Vardic. Daniel glanced back and saw faint shadows moving through the trees, their sleek forms reflecting the faint moonlight. "They're catching up," Tayani said, her voice tight with urgency. "Keep moving," Daniel urged, gripping his rifle tightly as they pressed on. Suddenly, a loud boom echoed through the forest, followed by a flash of light. Daniel's trap had been triggered. The screeching sound of mechanical voices followed, signaling confusion among their pursuers. "It worked," Tayani said, a flicker of hope in her tone. "For now," Daniel replied. "Let's not waste it." The forest opened up to reveal the river, its surface shimmering in the moonlight. Tayani pointed to a rocky outcrop on the far side. "The cave is just beyond that ridge." They splashed through the shallow water, the icy current soaking their boots. As they climbed the ridge, Daniel's heart pounded with both exertion and fear. The hum of the Vardic was growing louder again. They were relentless. As they reached the mouth of the cave, Tayani quickly activated a concealed panel. A faint glow lit up the entrance as a hidden door slid open, revealing her ship. It was small and battered, but still impressive in its alien design. "Get inside," Tayani urged, her fingers flying across a control panel. Daniel followed her in, scanning the dark forest one last time before the door shut behind them. The hum of the Vardic was almost deafening now, but for the moment, they were safe. "Now what?" Daniel asked, his breathing heavy. "Now," Tayani said, her eyes blazing with determination, "we fight back." The door to Tayani's ship closed with a heavy thud, sealing them inside. For a moment, all was silent except for the sound of Daniel's ragged breathing and the soft hum of the ship's systems coming online. The small, dimly lit cabin felt like a temporary refuge, but Daniel knew it wouldn't last. The Vardic hunters were still out there, relentless and closing in on them. They had no time to waste. "Are you sure this thing will hold up?" Daniel asked, eyeing the small, battered ship. It wasn't much, certainly not the kind of vessel that could outrun a fleet of advanced hunters. Tayani didn't look up from the control panel, her fingers flying over the buttons with practiced speed. "It's not about speed. It's about what we do next." She turned to face him, her violet eyes burning with an intensity he hadn't seen before. "I need your help, Daniel. I can't do this alone." Daniel stood, trying to process the gravity of her words. "I thought you came back for something bigger, something about saving your people." "I did," Tayani said, "but I came back for you too. You were right. The Vardic are relentless, and there's only one way to stop them. We have to take the fight to them. Daniel's mind raced. He had never signed up for a war. He was just a man who liked the quiet of his small farm, away from everything. But looking at Tayani, at the resolve in her eyes, he couldn't back down. She had risked everything to return to him. She believed in him, and that belief was powerful. "All right," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. "What's the plan?" Tayani smiled slightly, though it was filled with tension. "We need to disable their command ship. It's the heart of their operation. Without it, the Vardic will fall apart. But we'll have to infiltrate their heavily guarded space station." "Great," Daniel muttered, rubbing his jaw. "So we're not just running. We're going to storm their fortress." "Exactly." Tayani's voice was calm, but filled with purpose. "I'll need your mind, Daniel. Your ingenuity. The Vardic rely on technology, but they underestimate humans. They won't see us coming." Daniel's heart thudded in his chest as the weight of her words sank in. She was right. He had a gift for thinking outside the box, finding solutions where others saw walls. But this was different. This wasn't just fixing a broken machine. This was life or death. "We'll need a distraction," Daniel said, his mind already working. "Something big enough to draw their attention, but small enough to slip under their radar." Tayani raised an eyebrow. "You have an idea?" "Yeah," he said, a plan forming. "We'll use their own tech against them. I've seen enough of it to know their weaknesses." For the first time since Tayani had arrived, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. They weren't just running. They were fighting back. And if there was one thing he knew about himself, it was that he didn't back down from a challenge. "I'll get us close to their station," Tayani said, her hands now moving with precision as she powered up the ship. "But once we're inside their defenses, it's up to you." Daniel nodded. "Then let's make this count." As the ship's engines hummed to life and the stars outside blurred into streaks of light, Daniel realized just how much he had changed since Tayani first came into his life. He had once been a simple man, living in the quiet of Earth. Now he was about to lead a fight against an alien force that had no idea what was coming. And for the first time in years, he felt alive with purpose. His ship hummed with energy as it lifted off the ground, rising higher into the night sky. Daniel gripped the seat tightly, his eyes fixed on the view outside as they soared into the unknown. The quiet of Earth was now far behind them, replaced by the cold, infinite expanse of space. Tayani sat at the controls, her hands steady and confident as she guided the ship away from the planet's atmosphere. Despite the tension in the air, she seemed at ease, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the dim cabin light. Daniel couldn't help but admire her. She was different from anyone he'd ever known. Strong, intelligent, and unwavering in her resolve. "We'll need to cross through a few sectors," Tayani said, breaking the silence. "The Vardic station is in a heavily guarded part of the galaxy. If we don't stay off their radar, we won't make it." Daniel nodded, his thoughts racing. He'd never been in space before, never thought he would be. But here he was, about to take on an entire alien force with only a broken-down ship and his own wits. He wasn't sure what scared him more, the Vardic or the fact that he was actually going along with this. "So, what exactly are we up against?" Daniel asked, trying to shake off the nerves. "I mean, besides the Vardic themselves." Tayani glanced at him, her face serious. "The Vardic have built a fortress around their command ship. It's practically impenetrable, but their defenses are designed to stop large fleets, not small, agile ships like ours. If we can slip through unnoticed, we can disable their command center." "And how do you plan to disable a whole command center?" Daniel asked, raising an eyebrow. "That's not exactly something I can hack together in 5 minutes." Tayani's lips curled into a small smile. "That's where you come in. You're resourceful, Daniel. You've got the creativity to find a way. And I have the tech we'll need to get close." Daniel glanced at the small compartment near the back of the ship where Tayani had stashed a collection of alien tools and gadgets. He wasn't exactly sure how they worked, but he trusted Tayani's knowledge of her own technology. "What's the plan once we're inside?" Daniel asked. "We'll infiltrate their systems from the inside," Tayani explained. "There's a control panel hidden deep within the station. If we can access it, I can upload a virus to cripple their defenses. We need to get past their outer layers of security first." Daniel's mind began to turn the gears. It was starting to make sense. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just about brute force. It was about finding the cracks in their system, exploiting the weaknesses, something humanity was good at. And that's what Tayani needed. She needed his mind, his ability to think beyond the obvious. As the ship coasted through the silent void, Daniel found himself leaning into the challenge. The fear was still there, but it was starting to feel like something he could control. He wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was part of this mission. "How long until we get there?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. "Just a few hours," Tayani replied, her voice calm. "Stay sharp. Once we enter their space, they'll be watching." Daniel nodded, settling back into his seat. His pulse quickened as the stars blurred into streaks of light outside. This was it. There was no turning back now. He had no idea what awaited them. But one thing was certain. They were about to face the unknown together. And somehow, that felt right. The silence of space surrounded them as Tayani's ship drifted closer to the heart of enemy territory. Daniel could feel the tension building, thick in the air, despite the hum of the ship's engines. The Vardic space station was just ahead, a massive structure that loomed like a dark fortress in the void, its sharp edges and metal surfaces reflecting the faint light of distant stars. Tayani's fingers moved swiftly over the control panel, eyes focused on the monitors. "We're nearing the outer perimeter," she said, her voice steady. "Once we cross into their sector, we'll need to be invisible. No mistakes." Daniel sat in the seat beside her, his nerves on edge. He had never imagined he would be here, sneaking past enemy ships on an alien world, planning to bring down an entire fleet. But with every moment, he realized how serious this was. The Vardic weren't just a threat to Tayani's people. They were a threat to everything. "How do we get past their outer defenses?" Daniel asked, trying to steady his breathing. Tayani's lips curled into a faint, confident smile. "I've been tracking their patrol patterns for weeks. We'll avoid the main patrol routes and slip through a gap in their radar. But it's not going to be easy. If we're spotted, they'll know we're here." Daniel leaned forward, studying the screen. He could see faint blips, Vardic ships moving in regular patterns, patrolling the sector. "And if we get caught, they'll fire on us before we have a chance to explain," Tayani replied, her voice cold with certainty. "We can't let them catch us. This has to be clean." Daniel nodded, his mind shifting into gear. He'd seen enough of the enemy's tech to know how advanced it was. But he'd also seen enough to know that every system had its flaws. And that's where humans like him excelled, finding the weaknesses no one else could see. A thought struck him. What if we jam their communications, create a false signal? It'll confuse their radar. Tayani turned to him, eyes lighting up with appreciation. "That's a great idea. If we can disrupt their sensors just for a few seconds, we can slip right past." She quickly set to work, her hands moving faster than Daniel could follow, manipulating the ship's systems to emit a fake signal. The blips on the radar began to shift as the Vardic ships responded to the jamming. It was working. Daniel felt a rush of adrenaline as the gap between their ship and the enemy patrol widened. "Okay, we're in," Tayani said after a few tense moments. "We've crossed into the station's outer rings. We'll have to dock in a hidden section, and from there, we move quickly." They were close now, too close to fail. The Vardic space station was a labyrinth of cold metal, tight corridors, and high-tech security systems. Daniel had no illusions about how difficult this would be. The Vardic didn't leave their defenses to chance, but neither did he. As they approached a hidden docking bay on the station's far side, Daniel's thoughts raced. Once inside, there would be no more hiding. They'd have to fight their way through. But he was ready. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. "We're almost there," Tayani said, her voice unwavering as she steered the ship toward the bay. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. It was do or die, and he was ready to face whatever came next. The ship docked with a soft thud, and for a brief moment, the world outside was silent. Daniel glanced at Tayani, and though the weight of their mission hung heavy between them, there was a shared understanding. They were in this together. "Let's do this," Daniel said, determination hardening in his voice. Tayani nodded, her eyes meeting his with unspoken trust. "Let's end this." The air inside the Vardic space station was thick with the hum of high-tech machinery, its cold metallic walls reflecting the dim lights from the ship's control panels. Daniel and Tayani stepped into the shadowed docking bay. The door ceiling shut behind them with a soft hiss. The station was eerily quiet, as if waiting for something to happen. "This is it," Tayani whispered, her voice barely audible against the station's mechanical sounds. "We need to move fast. The control panel is deeper in, past the security checkpoint." Daniel nodded, his pulse quickening. Every step felt heavier now, as though the weight of their mission was pulling him down. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. The fate of Tayani's people rested on their shoulders. As they moved through the narrow corridors, Daniel kept his eyes peeled for any signs of movement. His hand never strayed far from the rifle at his side. They passed a few closed doors and a couple of security cameras, which Tayani quickly disabled with a few taps on her wrist device. They were moving smoothly, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The silence felt too perfect, too quiet. After a few turns, they reached a large room, a control hub of sorts. It was filled with blinking consoles, humming with life. Tayani's eyes lit up. "This is it," she said, rushing to one of the terminals. "I can upload the virus here and disable their defenses, but I need time." "Don't worry," Daniel said, keeping his voice low. He took up a position by the door, scanning the hallway for any signs of the enemy. He was ready to fight if necessary. Tayani worked quickly, her fingers flying across the terminal. But the minutes stretched on, and Daniel's tension grew. The air felt thicker now, charged with the pressure of their task. He couldn't help but glance back at her every few seconds. She was determined, focused, but he could see the strain in her face. Suddenly, a sound came from behind him. Footsteps. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He turned just in time to see a group of Vardic soldiers rounding the corner. "Ambush," Daniel shouted, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. Tayani looked up, panic flashing in her eyes. But before either of them could react, the Vardic soldiers opened fire, their weapons sending bright, deadly flashes into the dark room. Daniel dove behind a console, narrowly avoiding the blast. "Tayani, go," Daniel shouted, firing a few rounds in their direction to cover her. She hesitated for a second, then dashed to the terminal, her fingers moving faster than before. The soldiers were closing in, but just as they were about to corner Daniel, something unexpected happened. A voice boomed over the comms in the room. "Stop." Daniel froze. The Vardic soldiers paused as well, their heads swiveling toward the entrance. A tall figure stepped into the room, clad in dark armor. The soldiers immediately stood straighter, their respect clear. "I've been expecting you, Tayani," the figure said, his voice cold and calculating. Tayani's expression faltered for just a moment before she turned to face him. You're one of them." "Yes," he replied, stepping closer. "But I'm more than just a Vardic soldier. I am a traitor. And you, Tayani, have been a means to an end." Daniel's stomach sank. Something was wrong. This was no ordinary ambush. Tayani had been betrayed, and he was caught in the middle of it. Tyani's eyes narrowed, her fists clenched. "You're one of the resistance leaders, aren't you?" The man smiled darkly. "No, Tyani. I'm not a leader. I'm the one who sold your people out." Daniel's heart raced as he realized the truth. Tyani had trusted him, and now everything was falling apart. The person they thought was an ally, the one they had fought for, had turned against them, and the battle for survival had just become much more dangerous. The room seemed to close in around Daniel. The air was thick with tension as Tyani's eyes locked onto the traitor who had just revealed himself. The Vardek soldiers stood still, watching the confrontation unfold. For a brief moment, everything was silent, except for the steady beeping of the terminals and the distant hum of the station's core systems. Tyani's voice was sharp, filled with disbelief. "You betrayed us, all for power." The traitor, who had once been a trusted member of the resistance, simply shrugged. "It's never been about loyalty, Tyani. It's always been about survival. And now, I'm ensuring my future. The Vardek will pay handsomely for what I've done." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He had thought they were close to winning. So close to disabling the Vardek command center and freeing Tyani's people. But now, with this betrayal, everything was at risk. They had no choice but to act fast. Without thinking, Daniel moved, his feet carrying him across the room as he grabbed a nearby console. His fingers flew over the buttons, trying to find a way to override the security system. The traitor smirked as he saw what Daniel was doing. "You think you can stop me?" the man taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. "You're just a human. You don't belong here." Daniel gritted his teeth. He wasn't about to back down. He had faced impossible odds before, back on Earth, during the Starfire crisis. He knew how to fight back when everything seemed hopeless. This was no different. "I may be human," Daniel muttered under his breath, "but that doesn't mean I'm weak." His hands moved with purpose, bypassing the station's firewalls and hacking into the control systems. He couldn't disable the entire network just yet, but there was something he could do, something small but crucial. He found the station's internal power grid. It was heavily guarded, but with his quick thinking, Daniel managed to inject a small virus into the system. It wasn't much, but it was enough to disrupt their energy flow, weakening their shields and cutting off power to the defense systems for a short time. It wouldn't last long, but it would give them a chance. "Tyani," Daniel called. "I've disabled their shields for a moment. We need to move. Now." Tyani didn't hesitate. She grabbed her weapon, standing tall despite the shock of the betrayal. "We won't let him win," she said firmly. The traitor's face twisted in anger. "You think you can just walk away from this?" Before he could say more, the Vardek soldiers opened fire, the loud crack of their weapons filling the room. Daniel dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the blasts. Tyani took cover beside him, returning fire with precision. The traitor stepped back, clearly calculating his next move. But Daniel didn't wait. He acted, using the few precious moments the virus had bought them. Daniel sprinted toward the terminal. He had just hacked and activated the countdown for the station's internal defense system. The traitor had been so focused on stopping them that he didn't see Daniel's move. The countdown was set for only a few minutes, but it was enough to turn the tables. The Vardek defenses began to sputter, their targeting systems offline. In that moment of chaos, Daniel and Tyani made their move. They rushed past the traitor, who stood frozen in disbelief, unable to stop them. "We're not done yet," Tyani said, her voice full of determination as they raced toward the exit. Daniel couldn't help but smile. They had a chance, against all odds. As they dashed through the corridors, the station's lights flickered, and Daniel realized they had only moments before the Vardek regained control. But he wasn't worried. They had the upper hand now, and no one, not even a traitor, was going to take that from them. The corridors of the Vardek space station seemed endless, but Daniel and Tyani moved swiftly, their footsteps echoing in the cold silence. The countdown on Daniel's terminal ticked down, a reminder that their window of opportunity was closing fast. Behind them, the station's systems began to sputter, but the Vardic soldiers wouldn't stay down for long. They needed to move, and they needed to move now. "We're almost there," Tayani said, glancing at Daniel. Her face was streaked with sweat, but her eyes were still sharp, filled with determination. The betrayal had shaken her, but it hadn't broken her resolve. Daniel nodded, trying to push the fear out of his mind. They were close to the escape pods, his only chance to get them both off this station before the Vardic regrouped. As they rounded a corner, a sudden sound halted them. The hum of the station's internal systems shifted, followed by the sharp, unmistakable thud of footsteps. A group of Vardic soldiers appeared ahead, their weapons raised, and the unmistakable figure of the traitor stepped forward. "You really thought you could escape?" he sneered, his voice low but filled with venom. "You've sealed your fate, Tayani." Tayani's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. She wasn't about to waste words on someone who had already made his choices. Daniel stepped forward, his hand resting on the side of the wall. His heart was pounding in his chest, but he wasn't backing down. He had come this far. There was no turning back. "We don't need to do this," Daniel said, his voice steady but firm. "You've made your choice, but I don't think it's too late for you to rethink it." The traitor's expression twisted into a mocking smile. "You think I'm going to change sides now? You're weak. You're nothing but a human." Tayani's eyes flashed with anger. "You may have betrayed us, but you'll never understand what it means to stand together. You're alone." The traitor took a step back, his hand hovering near his weapon. "It doesn't matter," he muttered. "You won't make it out alive." Before he could finish, Daniel lunged forward, his body moving instinctively as he grabbed the nearest control panel. He jammed a button with all his strength, sending a surge of energy into the station's main power grid. Sparks flew from the control panel, and the lights flickered as alarms blared. "Now," Daniel shouted, grabbing Tayani's arm. They bolted toward the escape pods, the traitor's shouts following them. The station was beginning to fall apart. Sparks and smoke filled the air as systems shut down. They had only moments before the station's last defenses activated. Tayani and Daniel reached the pods, quickly entering one of them. As the doors sealed shut, Daniel slammed the launch button, sending the pod into the void of space. Through the small viewport, Daniel could see the station in the distance, now a blur of flashing lights as it began to collapse under the strain of its damaged systems. For a few moments, there was silence. The hum of the escape pod's engines was the only sound in the darkness. Tayani leaned back in her seat, her body exhausted but her eyes filled with relief. "We did it," she said softly, though her voice still carried the weight of everything that had happened. Daniel nodded, staring out at the stars. The mission was over, but it had come at a cost. They had survived, but the path ahead was still uncertain. "I never thought I'd be here," Daniel said quietly, "but I'm glad I am." Tayani smiled, her eyes softening. "I'm glad you are too." As the pod drifted away from the wreckage of the Vardic station, Daniel realized that their fight wasn't over, but they had won this battle. And no matter what came next, he knew they would face it together. The stars ahead of them seemed to shimmer with possibility. The journey was far from over, but now they had a future they would fight for, side by side.